Thanks for tuning in. So, a number of years ago, Jordan Peterson sat down and had a discussion with Matt Dillahunty. They covered various topics, and I found a clip which I found quite interesting because Peterson has talked about many atheists living their lives as if they believe that God exists. And I think that he's really coming at it from a moral angle. We've got a question here in the Q&A after really the discussion has taken place, and somebody is asking what would a genuine atheist really be like. And so we're going to listen to that question, then hear Peterson's answer, and then I'm going to come in at the end with a few concluding comments.
Atheists. I'm curious why you think that. Is it just because we have sacred values, that everyone has sacred values? What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. And I can't really come up with a better answer than that because it's such a complicated question that that's the right answer. You know, I love that book. It's an amazing book, and it's a great thriller, by the way. If there are some of you, perhaps many of you, who haven't read it, you really should read it because it might be the greatest novel ever written. I think you can make a case for that. It's unbelievably exciting once you get into it. And Raskolnikov, he plots the perfect murder. It's so interesting because Dostoevsky, the last thing Dostoevsky ever did was make a straw man out of his opponents, let's say. What Dostoevsky did in all of his great novels was make his enemies, let's say, or make each of the positions that he was trying to contend with as powerful and admirable as he possibly could. And since he was an absolutely spectacular genius, he could really do that. And so Raskolnikov plots a murder, and he murders this horrible woman, who's horrible according to everyone who knows her, who also has enslaved her rather mentally feeble niece, and who does nothing but make people miserable consciously all the time. And he does that in order to save his sister from a rather sophisticated form of prostitution, to save himself from starvation so that he can become a great lawyer and help people. Right? So Dostoevsky sets up the stage. Here is the perfect situation for a murder, and all of the rational choices point in that direction. And Raskolnikov, who's also sort of torturing himself, or sort of tortured because he's sort of hungry and not very well, not thinking very clearly, he undertakes the murder, and he gets away with it. And before he does it, he berates himself in what I would describe as the negative atheistic style. And he basically says, look, there is every rational reason to split this woman's skull with an axe. Look at all the good I would do. Look at all the well-being I would enhance. And so he does it. And then all hell breaks loose. And what Dostoevsky was Raskolnikov built himself up to the murder in part by laying out the rational case, but also by saying, well, there's no God. There's no metaphysical reason that's stopping me from committing this act. And there's all these reasons that appear perfectly rational, pushing me in that direction. Perhaps I'm nothing but a moral coward for failing to undertake it. So he does. But what he finds out is that he broke an inviolable moral rule, something that spoke to his own soul, so to speak. And the rest of the book basically involves his sequential post-traumatic unraveling. And the post-traumatic issue is very interesting because one of the things you do see happening with post-traumatic stress disorder is that it very often occurs in people who watch themselves do something of great malevolence. By their own admission, I'm not projecting this onto them. They've watched themselves they've stepped outside the ancient moral code unwittingly and conducted themselves in a manner they cannot reconcile themselves to, and they are permanently broken. So there are works like that, Crime and Punishment, first and foremost, I would say, that do a lovely job of elucidating in narrative form how these self-evident moral presuppositions are necessarily nested inside this broader narrative metaphorical substrate, and that you use your rationality divorced from that metaphorical substrate at your peril. And I believe that to be the case. I think that's an accurate psychological summation.
Thank you.
I think.
I have plenty.
So it's rather surprising, and I promise you I don't mean this to be insulting, because I definitely place you considerably higher than most of the apologists that I've engaged with. But there's a common theme from the apologists, and that is, you're not really an atheist because. Now, in Dr. Peterson's case, it's, you're not really an atheist because, in my mind, an atheist is someone who would be a murderer. And so I'm just, rather than saddle you with that, you just think you're an atheist, but really you're not. From other apologists, it's, you think you're an atheist, but you're not, because God's written his moral code on your heart. This is essentially, as far as I can tell, what was expressed in some way, that there's a moral foundation, a moral center that God has imbued people with, and that we all know this, or we all recognize it, or you're not really an atheist, or this is what an atheist would do. An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God. I am not convinced there's a God. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm convinced there are no gods, although that is a subset of, hey, I don't believe there's a God, and then there's a subset that is, I believe there are no gods. This is, as I've talked about previously, independent of whether or not I can be a moral being or do good things. It's independent from whether or not there's awe and wonder or purpose and meaning in my life. In much the same way that, previously they wanted to kind of say, oh, this is a secular humanist, regime that was just awful. Well, it wasn't secular humanism. There were atheist fans who wrote me that were like, oh man, I can't wait till you do this conversation with Jordan. And I was like, cool. And still, I hope that we have many more conversations as well, because just saying one thing that I find irritating is never going to be enough to get rid of me. But I asked them, great, I'm not that familiar with him. What is it about him that you like, and what are the concerns? And they came back with a bunch of things. None of them said anything about agreeing with views on religion. They seemed very confused on those things. And so the good news for them is that while he thinks atheists would be murderers, he doesn't actually think you're an atheist. And that is his way of getting around acknowledging things that conflict with his worldview. I don't get to decide who is or isn't a true Christian. I didn't even get to decide that when I was a believer. I definitely don't get to do it now. So if somebody tells me they're a Christian, I'm going to have to accept that. I have a model in my head of what that means. I have a model in my head of what it means to be a Muslim, but I'm willing for them to explain to me what their model is. I know people who identify as Christian atheists. They really love the stuff that Jesus said, but they don't actually believe there's God. Thomas Jefferson famously cut out the Jefferson Bible and removed every reference to the supernatural and miracles and things like that because he really admired the teachings of it. And sure, I think you could be a cultural Christian in that if you wanted to. It's strange to me that I'm not sitting here with somebody like Ray Comfort when I'm told you're not really an atheist because you're too good to be an atheist. And this is what atheists hear all the time when they come out. They've been sidelined because of religious privilege around the world for years. And then atheists come out to their family members or friends or people they've known for years, and they're like, you're an atheist? How can that be? You're such a good person. I've known you all this time. It's because the mindset of what people have about what an atheist is has been poisoned by religious proclamations. We have been denigrated from the pulpit, and it has seeped into every aspect of culture, right up to the height of intellectual pursuits. And it's time for that to end.
So there we are, Peter's answer on what a genuine atheist would be like. Raskolnikov from Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And Matt's response, I found it very interesting, Matt saying that when he spoke to people before meeting with Peterson, what is he like? And they told him, and Matt said, it would take more than Peterson saying one thing that would really irritate him for him not to want to talk to him again. And I think we found an example here. I think Matt was very irritated with this line that Peterson took. The thing is, this position of many Christians that, you know, we're not really atheists because God has written morality on our hearts. We only think we're atheists, that on some kind of subconscious level we all believe because God has imprinted his morality onto our hearts, even if we don't know it. Well, of course, it's something which cannot be proven and it can't be falsified. So it's a pretty much useless position, in my opinion. And it's a position which Peterson is really arguing for. And Matt probably could have done a slightly better job there in spelling out the fact that it's unfalsifiable. It can't be proven. Well, it can't be proven one way or the other. So in that sense, it's a useless position to have. The whole morality question is such a big one. It's obviously not something that I want to start reviewing it, but I thought that Peterson's answer was extremely poor, lacked any kind of real insight or knowledge of the moral question, philosophically speaking. Secular morality versus theistic morality. He seems to know very little. I've heard him quote Crime and Punishment many times. I'm not really even convinced that he's got a really good grasp of that novel. It's a long time since I've read it, and obviously I remember it fairly well, but I don't remember the questions that Raskolnikov was asking himself, the internal conflict, particularly the part where Peterson claims that he is effectively saying that because there is no God, anything is permissible, and that it's justified for me to kill in order to achieve higher ends. In other words, his sister won't have to marry some horrible old man, and Raskolnikov, having stolen the old woman's money, will have sufficient to get himself through law school, etc., etc. I remember some of it, but not enough of it really to comment very much. But I don't really think it's that relevant. Dostoevsky was a theist. He believed in God, and I'm not entirely convinced that he had Raskolnikov truly go through all the options and consider the fact that there might be an acceptable secular morality that he could appeal to. Okay, well, Matt's response was reasonable, and he finished off, you know, in quite a suitable way there. So anybody that wants to leave any opinions on what Peterson and Matt said, or indeed on my take on it, I'd be delighted to know your comments. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.